Chapter 6. The Surrender. The silence that followed Damien's confession was more profound than any sound. It was a vacuum, pulling all the air from the vast penthouse, leaving nothing but the raw, exposed truth of his words hanging between them. That kiss. It wasn't a lie, and that's the part that's going to get us killed. Evie stared at the man before her, the man she had catalogued as arrogant, reckless, and chaotic. But the demon was gone. In his place stood Damien, stripped of his armor, his gray eyes bleak with a vulnerability that pierced her straight through the heart. All his antagonism, his mockery, the way he'd picked at her insecurities with surgical precision, it hadn't been an attack. It had been a desperate, clumsy defense against a feeling he couldn't dominate, a strength in her he couldn't break. Her analytical mind, her greatest weapon and shield, went silent. There was no data to process here, no profile to build. There was only the shattered man in front of her and the undeniable echo of his admission in her own soul. The kiss in the hallway had shaken her to her core, a terrifying bolt of lightning that had illuminated a truth she had been desperately trying to ignore. She was just as drawn to the storm in him as he was to the calm in her. Slowly, she lifted a hand. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his frame, as if expecting a blow or a dismissal. He was braced for rejection. Instead, her fingers came to rest gently against the rough stubble on his jaw, right beside the faint white scar she had once seen as a mark of violence. Now, it just looked like a part of him. "Damien," she whispered, his name a soft, unfamiliar sound on her lips. It was the first time she'd used it. At her touch, a tremor ran through him. The last vestiges of his control seemed to crumble. He closed his eyes, leaning into her palm, as if it were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. A ragged breath escaped him. That was all it took. The dam of frustration, of forced proximity and forbidden desire, didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He moved first, his hands coming up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones with a desperate, reverent tenderness that was utterly at odds with the brute she had thought he was. He didn't pull her. He didn't demand. He simply held her, his stormy eyes searching hers, asking a question he didn't dare speak aloud. Her answer was to rise on her toes and meet his lips with her own. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no panic, no desperation, no audience. This was a deliberate surrender. It was slow, deep, and devastatingly honest. The faint taste of whiskey on his tongue mingled with the pure, unadulterated taste of him. His lips, which had snarled so many insults at her, were now soft, questioning, then hungry as she pressed back against him. A groan tore from his throat, a sound of profound relief and agonizing need. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her off her feet as if she weighed nothing and hauled her against him. Her legs instinctively wrapped around his waist, her hands tangling in the dark, unruly hair at the back of his neck, pulling him closer. The animosity that had defined them was incinerated in a blast of pure, white-hot heat. Every taunt, every argument, every calculated distance they had maintained was fuel for this inferno. He carried her from the kitchen, his mouth never leaving hers. Their movements were frantic, clumsy, a stark contrast to the elegant prison they inhabited. He bumped into a muck-ass chair, knocking it askew, a welcome disruption in the penthouse's sterile perfection. This was messy, this was human, this was real. He carried her across the threshold of the single bedroom, the room that had been the battlefield for their first major confrontation. Now it was a sanctuary. He laid her down on the king-sized bed, the cool, thousand-thread Count duvet, a stark contrast to the fire raging between them. For a moment he loomed over her, his powerful frame silhouetted against the soft glow of the city lights. She saw the conflict in his eyes, years of solitude and self-reliance warring with the terrifying vulnerability of wanting someone this much. The demon who worked alone was afraid. Reaching up, she traced the line of his clenched jaw. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here." Her permission, her acceptance, was the only thing he needed. He came down to her, and the world narrowed to the rustle of clothing being discarded, the slide of skin against skin, the frantic beat of two hearts finally hammering in unison. Every touch was a revelation. His hands, which she'd imagined were only capable of inflicting violence, mapped her body with a reverence that made her ache. She explored the slender frame she was self-conscious of, not with judgment, but with an almost desperate appreciation, as if memorizing her by touch. He discovered the sensitive skin of her inner thighs, the curve of her waist, the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. She, in turn, discovered the man beneath the muscle. She traced the landscape of his back, the ridges of old scars that told stories he had never shared. She felt the coiled power in his shoulders finally go slack under her touch. The walls hadn't just crumbled, they were annihilated, reduced to dust. When he finally entered her, it was a slow, deliberate union. A joining that was both acclaiming and a complete surrender. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his harsh breaths ghosting against her skin. Evie, he rasped, her real name a prayer, a confession. In that room, with the city sleeping below, they were no longer Agent Cross and Dr. Greed. They were not Alexander and Isabel Blackwood. They were just Damien and Evie, two fractured people who had found an unexpected, terrifying wholeness in each other's arms. They erased the lines they had drawn in the sand, crossing over into a territory from which there could be no retreat. Evie woke to the unfamiliar weight of a heavy arm draped possessively over her waist. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, painting the room in soft morning gold. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories of the night before flooded back, the confession, the kiss, the surrender. The scent of him, leather, soap, and something uniquely, muscly Damien clung to the sheets to her skin. She turned her head slowly on the pillow. He was still asleep, his ruggedly handsome face relaxed and free of its usual cynical smirk. His dark hair was a mess against the white pillowcase, and his breathing was slow and even. In sleep, he looked younger, the harsh lines of his life momentarily smoothed away. A powerful protective surge washed over her, so potent it was dizzying. Her fake relationship had become terrifyingly, irrevocably real. He stirred, his gray eyes fluttering open. They focused on her, and for a split second, she saw a flicker of the old wariness. Then recognition dawned, followed by a slow, gentle smile that was so foreign on his face, it made her heart skip a beat. "Morning, Doc," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He didn't move his arm. If anything, he pulled her a fraction of it an inch closer. "Good morning," she whispered back, a blush rising on her cheeks. The easy silence that settled between them was more intimate than anything that had happened the night before. They had existed in a state of perpetual conflict for so long that this simple peace felt revolutionary. But the world outside their bedroom hadn't stopped turning. The mission was still active. The danger was still real. An hour later, they were sitting at the kitchen island, dressed and sipping coffee. The air was different, charged but with intimacy, not animosity. Damien reached over and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a casual gesture that sent a jolt through her. "Time to see what the devil was talking about," he said, his voice back to its gravelly timbre, but the hard edge was gone. Evie nodded, pulling the tablet towards them. She initiated the playback for the audio file from Croft's office, captured in the hours after they'd left. They listened together, shoulder to shoulder, his arm resting on the back of her chair. Croft's smooth, cultured voice filled the penthouse, discussing finances, logistics, shipping manifests. It was all heavily coded, but it was the proof they needed. Then, a new voice joined the call. "The buyers are getting anxious, Julian," the new voice said. "They want a demonstration, a show of faith before the final transfer." Croft's reply was chillingly calm. "Patience is a virtue, but very well. We'll arrange something for them. A little private excursion this weekend. Perhaps my new friends, the Blackwoods, would like to join us. A man like Alexander would appreciate the exclusivity of the affair." Evie's blood ran cold. She looked at Damien, his face now a mask of cold fury. Their now-found intimacy had made their cover more convincing, drawing them deeper into the viper's nest. They had surrendered to each other only to find themselves summoned for a command performance, deeper in a war they might not survive.